The vibes have definitely shifted, right? In the summer, there was this sort of euphoria when Kamala Harris became the candidate, and that has definitely faded. Um, and I think if you were to just get your sort of sense of the election from like Twitter, or I guess X, if you were just to get your sense of narrative from Twitter right now, you would think that the Harris campaign is totally falling apart. Um, Even though she was actually this week's polls were good for her, right? I mean, I think everybody's so scarred from polling because of 2016. Every liberal leaning person in the US is so scarred from polling because of 2016. Um, but I think, for example, in September, she did something like one of every 3 days had no public appearances. People didn't understand why that was. She now did a media blitz, but in that media blitz, she said things like, um, for example, she went on The View and said one difference between her and Joe Biden is that she's going to put a Republican in her cabinet. Or she went on a late night show last night and they said, "How are you different?" And from Biden, and she said, or like, "What's different about you?" And she said, "Well, I'm not Joe Biden, and I'm also not Donald Trump." And everyone, of course, hated that answer. Um, I think part of this is that there's a lot. If you're a progressive voter in America, there's a lot that's upsetting you right now, particularly about American foreign policy. And it also is causing you agita, right? We talked about this last week and what expanding war in the Middle East and Biden's Middle East policy could mean for Kamala Harris. But I also think there's an element of this is going to be a very close election. This was always going to be a very close election, um, just because of how the American electoral system is set up. And there really isn't one answer that Kamala Harris is going to give on a talk show that's going to change the fact that this is going to be a very close election. And so while I agree that she should be doing more media, while I agree that like Tim Walz should have been a little more aggressive during the vice presidential debate, while I agree that he should have had a tighter answer on what month he was in China in 1989, um, while I agree that they should still be hitting them more heavily on abortion and reproductive rights, I really don't think that they're like I think the vibes are bad because the reality is bad, which is that Trump tried to steal an election and is still neck and neck in the polls and is probably, no matter what they do, going to be very close in the polls.
The vibes were going to have to shift because they shifted before, didn't they? I mean, it's not very long ago that Joe Biden was still the candidate. It all looked as if it was going to be very hard for Donald Trump not to win. There was that moment when there was the assassination attempt, and a lot of the commentary was, "Is this the moment that's won Donald Trump the election?" Although there wasn't a great deal of analysis of why that might ever be. And so the swing back when Harris got the nomination was probably overcorrecting, really. And the reality of it has always been, or has always been since Biden dropped out, that this is a close election that either side could win on a good day. And I don't know what people want beyond consistent Harris poll leads, which, given the state of US politics in general, they are just not going to get. That was never really on the table.
No matter what the Harris campaign does, they're going to be seen as going for primarily one voting group. So, for example, obviously saying I'll put a Republican in my candidate, or I'll put a Republican in my cabinet, or saying in 60 Minutes, like, I think America's main adversary is Iran, that's going to be seen as targeting a more moderate voter, right? Which is going to upset progressives. On the other hand, saying that I would expand Medicare to pay for home care, which she did, like, that's going to be seen as targeting progressives, which could upset moderates. So it sort of goes back to the factionalism conversation in a way as well, in that because the Republican Party is so clearly one thing right now, which is, like, I would say far reactionary, to the point of cultish, right? The Democratic Party is the big tent party, which is good in that it means that there are lots of different votes that they're trying to get, but is rough in that it means that there's this coalition that they're trying to keep together in order to manage to beat this threat from the right. And we're seeing and in all this we're seeing a realignment where it's like, do the Democrats still have working class votes? Are they just going for college educated people? Like, is it which is the more dependable vote for the Democratic Party right now? Like, what demographic is that? And I don't, as we were saying, as Rohan said, for the sort of on India, like, I think when you dig down into the data, it's not really, there's no one thing that you can say, ah, yes, it's this.